Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we have a very specific mission for you, and it's an ambitious one. We've pulled together a whole stack of sources, articles, studies, you name it, all focused on one thing: helping you communicate complex ideas really quickly and really thoroughly. To do that, we are dissecting a curated list of 30 high-impact words and phrases. These are designed to just, immediately elevate your speaking and your writing. And we're not just defining words like, say, foreseeable future or invaluable. No, we're treating them as analytical keys. This deep dive is all about understanding the nuances, the best ways to use them in context and the collocations, and what they unlock about modern life, society, and even personal character. This is your shortcut to sounding well-informed instantly.
And that's the crucial distinction, isn't it? For anyone who needs to synthesize information fast, maybe you're prepping for a presentation or just curious, the right vocabulary is the engine. It's all about efficiency. If you find yourself using really simple descriptive language, you're probably spending way too many sentences just to get one idea across. So think of these 30 items as like power tools for commentary. When you master them, you move past just basic descriptions, like saying something is very helpful, to giving insightful analytical commentary, like calling that same thing invaluable. We're going to connect the sophisticated vocabulary directly to the real world, so by the end of this, you'll have 30 new usable ways to articulate complex thought.
Okay, let's do it. Let's unpack this enormous stack of material and jump straight into our first section, which is all about structuring our understanding of time, planning, and value. Because we all need a way to talk about the future without making promises we can't really keep. So we're starting with a really foundational phrase. You hear it constantly in business, law, and even just personal planning, foreseeable future. My immediate question is, what's the hard boundary here? When I use this phrase, how far out am I actually committing to something?
Well, that's the interesting thing. That lack of a hard boundary is precisely what gives the phrase its power and its nuance. Foreseeable future just means as far into the future as you can reasonably plan or predict. And our sources all confirm that this time frame is, it's intensely context dependent.
Okay, so it changes.
It totally changes. If a financial analyst is talking about a volatile currency, the foreseeable future might just be 6 months.
Right.
But if a government is planning infrastructure spending, it could stretch out 5, maybe even 10 years. And in our personal lives, it's often the next 1 to 2 years.
So it's not really a unit of time. It's more a measure of your confidence in your current plan.
Exactly. It defines the edge of your planning horizon. And this is so crucial because it lets you describe your intention, especially for things you are not planning to do immediately, while still leaving the door open for, vague future possibilities. If you just say, I'm not moving, that sounds so absolute.
Final, yeah.
But if you say, I'm not moving in the foreseeable future, you've introduced this sophisticated boundary. You've managed expectations.
I can see the utility in that model answer the sources gave, where the speaker is talking about a huge life decision.
Yeah.
They use the phrase to talk about their current stability, but still acknowledge these future desires.
That example is a perfect masterclass in hedging your bets, but responsibly. They state it clearly. I don't have any plans to move in the foreseeable future. And then they back it up. They say they're happy in Edinburgh. They have family, friends there. It grounds the statement in their present reality.
But then they layer in that distant possibility. But maybe at some point, I might consider moving to Spain. I mean, that's a huge life-changing shift.
Yeah.
They just said, I might move to Spain. It would sound like they were packing their bags tomorrow.
Exactly. By anchoring their present intention with foreseeable future, the idea of Spain becomes this long-term aspiration, not an immediate plan.
And I noticed the descriptive details they used to make it sound so reasoned. They mentioned the cold Scottish winters, but then balance that with how beautiful Scotland is in the summer.
Yes, they're giving context for why the foreseeable future is stable, but also why the unforeseeable future might involve a change of scenery. It's smart.
So this highlights how foreseeable future works perfectly with a phrase like at some point. Use the first one to lock down your immediate, reliable plans, and the second to talk about those bigger, less defined goals.
It's an essential toolkit for professional conversations about long-term strategy, whether that's a company's investment or a family deciding on career paths.
So if you can use that phrase when you're talking about anything with long-term implications, buying a house, planning a trip, a new degree, you instantly signal that you're approaching it with a structured, kind of phased methodology.
It's a very high-impact, low-effort vocabulary win.
Okay, let's shift from time to value. We often need a way to express extreme utility, and for that we have the word Invaluable.
Invaluable. It means extremely useful or valuable. It's a word that suggests a value that's beyond calculation. And this is where we have to pause on the technical side, because a lot of listeners, when they first see this word, they mistakenly assume the in prefix means not, like inaccurate or incomplete.
Right, which would mean not valuable, which is the complete opposite of what it actually means.
Precisely. The prefix in here is an intensive. It's similar to priceless, meaning it's too valuable to even be measured. And the key to sounding sophisticated here is getting the pronunciation right. The stress isn't on the first syllable, it's invaluable. If you stress it correctly, you immediately signal that you get its function as an intensive adjective.
And to make this word really stick, we need to know its partners. What are the natural collocations that the source material emphasizes?
The sources are very clear on this. For impactful communication, focus on 3 combinations. We talk about invaluable help, invaluable support, and maybe the most common, invaluable experience. These combinations are really the building blocks of high-level commentary.
So let's apply that last one invaluable experience to the example of an internship for a young person. It really elevates the discussion way beyond just saying it was useful or they learned a lot.
It really does. An internship offers invaluable experience and knowledge because that student is gaining real-world skills and professional insight that you just can't teach in a classroom. That experience might shape their whole career path or build their network, making it literally impossible to assign a simple dollar value to the opportunity.
Wait a minute, the source material follows that positive point up with a subtle ethical challenge? I think we need to spend a moment analyzing that critical layer of thought.
Absolutely. This is where a sophisticated discussion really begins. The sources note that while the experience is invaluable, we have to immediately consider the ethics of compensation. The source points out that it's generally better if people are paid for work experience because, and I'm quoting here, ultimately they are offering a service.
So we're balancing the intangible value of learning with the tangible reality of labor. The argument seems to be that if the work is actually useful to the employer, if it's a real service, then the student is contributing and should be compensated regardless of the value they get back.
That's the implied argument. If a system relies on people working just for the invaluable experience, it potentially favors those who are already economically privileged and can afford to work for free.
Right.
So a truly sophisticated analysis has to acknowledge the invaluable nature of the experience while at the same time critiquing the systemic fairness of unpaid labor. It shows you can hold 2 complex, even contradictory ideas in your mind at once.
Which is a fundamental requirement of advanced commentary. Moving beyond simple praise to critical analysis, that's a fantastic transition to our last word in this section, which is about measuring progress analytically. Decade. It means 10 years. Simple. But why is it inherently more sophisticated than just saying the last 10 years?
It's because of the context it implies. When you use decades, especially in writing or analytical speaking, you're immediately signaling that you are looking at macro trends at substantial timeframes. And the pronunciation note is simple but vital. Stress on the first syllable, decade. Mispronouncing it as dade is a pretty common error that can signal less familiarity with academic or business language.
So the word itself positions you as someone who analyzes historical patterns, not just someone reporting on the recent past.
Exactly. When you're analyzing data, say, a line graph showing population growth or tech adoption, it's often broken down into 10-year chunks. To say there has been a substantial increase in technology companies over the last decade synthesizes a huge volume of data efficiently.
You're not talking about a recent fad. You're talking about a structural shift.
That's it. Can I give a specific example of how mispronunciation can signal you're a novice in a high-stakes conversation?
Please do.
Think about other common multisyllable words from Latin, like consensus or parameter. If you habitually misplace the stress, it just interrupts the flow of a sophisticated discussion. For decade, using the correct decade when describing a trend, say an environmental change, we have seen an acceleration of polar ice loss this decade compared to the previous one. It instantly places you in the domain of serious, informed analysis.
So we move from the personal, colloquial use, I moved here a decade ago, to the analytical use that defines long-term systemic change.
The word itself is a structural pillar for historical and predictive discussion.
And it frames the discussion historically, allowing you to compare and contrast large blocks of time, which is just essential for any high-level review of trends, whether that's in finance, sociology, or even your own personal development. That perfectly wraps up our first set of concepts about time and value. Now let's shift gears and focus on how we categorize people, their inner qualities, and the dynamics of relationships. Okay, we're moving from the macro structures of time to the microstructure of personality. And let's start with a really relaxed, colloquial phrase that's highly useful in speaking. The kind type of person who.
This is your go-to phrase for describing typical consistent behavior. You wouldn't use it in a formal academic essay, but it lends incredible color and, a natural flow to conversational descriptions. We should also note the casual pronunciation where the of often gets compressed, so it sounds like kinder or typer.
It lets you quickly establish a baseline for someone's behavior. For instance, describing someone's routine. She's the kind of person who goes to bed at the exact same time every night. Or talking about personal non-negotiables. I'm the type of person who absolutely needs a second cup of coffee before I can seriously start studying.
The model answer in the source material uses this phrase perfectly to explain sleeping patterns without sounding defensive at all. The speaker clarifies, I'm not the type of person that feels that I have to wake up at the crack of dawn. So instead of just saying, I sleep late, they contextualize it as a consistent behavioral pattern.
Right.
They're prioritizing getting 7 or 8 hours of rest to feel fully energized. It transforms a simple habit into a really informed preference.
It's all about providing context for personal choices. If you're trying to explain a habit, framing it this way gives the listener immediate insight into your psychology.
It connects an individual action to a general principle of how you operate. You're basically saying, this action isn't random. It stems from a core part of my behavioral identity.
Now, let's tackle a really critical social topic. How we view money, possessions, and social standing, starting with materialistic and materialism.
This vocabulary is absolutely essential for social critique. Materialistic is the adjective defining a person, a society, or even a generation that believes money and possessions are the most important things in life. And the noun, materialism, is often used to critique broader societal trends, the greed and materialism of modern society.
This concept is so important because it forces us to analyze the why behind consumption. When we look at the historical usage of the term, it often spiked during periods of rapid economic growth.
Absolutely. And the sources force us to answer a tough question. What are the problems with being materialistic? This isn't just about a moral judgment. The analysis is rooted in practical, sustainable living. The first problem identified is financial. It requires a constant, unending need for more money. If your satisfaction comes only from buying new things, that cycle just never ends.
And if you can't buy the next thing, you face dissatisfaction. But the second problem the sources raise is about sustainability. And I don't think they just mean environmental sustainability.
You're right. It's about personal sustainability. A materialistic life constantly demands newer, better, and often more expensive products. That's not just economically taxing, it's psychologically exhausting. Compare that need for constant external validation through objects to finding meaning in relationships, community, and personal growth.
The sources argue that finding happiness in friendship, relationships, and doing good in the world is a lot more sustainable. It's a profound contrast. External fragile validation versus internal lasting fulfillment.
This is particularly relevant today when we think about digital materialism, the pursuit of virtual status symbols online, which are even more fleeting and arbitrary than physical goods. And this leads us directly to the core mechanism of materialism, the status symbol.
Okay, define that for us.
A status symbol is something people own or actively want to own because they believe that ownership will make other people respect them. It's an external sign of internal success.
And we use dynamic verbs with this. Items act as a status symbol, they represent one, or they are a status symbol. Cars, watches, jewelry, those are the classic, tangible examples.
They're ways of showing the world your success and wealth. The source material is quite direct about the underlying motivation. It's the deep-seated desire to be seen as special. Why do people spend exorbitant amounts of money on luxury items? Because those items communicate to others that they can afford what others can't, reinforcing a hierarchy of success.
The concept of the status symbol is often, invisible until you learn the term. Once you have it, you start seeing symbolic consumption everywhere. It changes how you analyze marketing and social interactions.
It gives you the linguistic framework to move beyond saying, that's an expensive car, to that car is clearly deployed as a status symbol in this neighborhood. It just instantly elevates the quality of the analysis from description to critique.
Okay, moving from possessions to people, let's look at social and professional dynamics, starting with the wonderful informal phrase, a people person.
Simple, concise, and highly communicative. It defines someone who's naturally friendly, gregarious, and genuinely enjoys meeting and talking to others. The sources use this term to set up a quick contrast with an introvert, someone who might prefer the quiet company of a book.
What I appreciate, though, is the pushback against that binary label. The speaker's self-description is much more nuanced. They say they're a mix. They enjoy close friends and meeting new people one-on-one, but they actively dislike large, noisy groups, huge parties, or crowded bars.
That nuance is key. Sophisticated communicators don't rely on simplistic labels like extrovert or introvert. They use descriptive terms like a people person to define what kind of social interaction they enjoy or avoid. It allows for a much more accurate and honest portrayal of social preferences.
And in professional settings, that ability to connect is summarized by a powerful French-derived word, rapport.
Rapport. It means having a good understanding with someone, coupled with the ability to communicate easily and effectively. And technically, the T is silent, so it's pronounced rapport, with the stress on the second syllable.
Right.
Correct pronunciation is pretty critical here, as mispronouncing it can be highly distracting.
So we build or establish rapport, and we describe the quality of that connection using adjectives like friendly, good, or close rapport. Where do the sources emphasize the importance of this concept most strongly?
In education and in management. The sources spend a significant amount of time detailing why rapport is not a soft skill for teachers, but a core necessity for pedagogical success. Without it, students just close off and learning diminishes.
And they break down how to establish rapport into two brilliant, tangible steps. The first is almost ridiculously simple, yet often neglected: learning students' names.
It seems so minor, but that simple act immediately signals respect and personalization. It transitions the teacher-student relationship from one of distant authority to one of mutual recognition.
The second step is fostering mutual respect through consistent professional behavior. This means the teacher arriving on time, being kind and fair to all students, not playing favorites, and crucially, making the class as engaging and interesting as possible.
Rapport is sustained by consistent professional respect. It's a two-way street. If the teacher demonstrates diligence and fairness, they establish the necessary foundation for the student to trust and communicate effectively.
That sets up a perfect internal transition into the characteristics of learning itself. If rapport is external, success often requires internal qualities, starting with diligent.
Diligent means careful and using a lot of effort, showing thoroughness and focus. It is the absolute antithesis of last-minute cramming. The diligent student approaches their work with consistency.
The sources show us how versatile this word is across its forms. The adjective, diligent student; the noun, diligence doing your work with care; and the adverb, diligently completing tasks diligently.
It's a word that speaks to character as much as performance. When you describe an employee or a student as diligent, you're praising their work ethic and their commitment to quality, which is often more valuable than raw talent alone.
Speaking of talent versus effort, I have to admit, I was definitely not a particularly diligent student in high school. I relate heavily to that anecdote in the sources about being easily distracted. I had this one friend who was constantly telling hilarious stories right before class. My focus was, well, it was definitely elsewhere. I think that's why I appreciate this vocabulary now. It frames diligence as a conscious choice of focus and effort.
It absolutely does, and it contrasts slightly with our next term, studious.
Okay, so studious is defined as someone who likes to spend a lot of time studying. We commonly hear of a studious child or a studious student.
And the sources use this word to engage with a genuinely difficult and frequently debated societal question. Are girls inherently more studious than boys? This is a great opportunity to show you how to use sophisticated language to navigate a potential conversational minefield.
And the key strategy they provide is invaluable. Resist the temptation to make broad generalizations based on sex.
You have to acknowledge the question, but then you immediately shift the focus back to individual variation and personal effort. The strategy is to state clearly that being studious really depends on the person, not necessarily the gender.
And they use empirical evidence, personal anecdotes, to reinforce this point. They mentioned the most studious person they knew in university was a male friend, while the most studious person they lived with after graduation was a woman. That immediately grounds the argument in individual reality rather than generalization.
They also added an interesting side observation, noting that both girls and boys often appear more studious when they're in single-sex schools, maybe because of reduced social pressure. But the final conclusion remains firm. Diligence and being studious are qualities of the individual, not the group. This is how you use high-impact vocabulary to steer away from simplistic, often biased conclusions.
Our final word in this section, inquisitive, brings us back to intellectual curiosity, though it carries a slight warning label with it. It means wanting to discover as much as you can about things, but sometimes, in an annoying way, it can border on being nosy.
It's the dual nature of curiosity. We applaud an inquisitive mind, and we value an inquisitive student who's eager to ask penetrating questions. But the usage also allows us to critique excessive probing.
Like the source materials example of the 5-year-old cousin who drives their parents mad by constantly asking why. That is curiosity, but it becomes intrusive.
Exactly. When you use the word inquisitive, you are acknowledging the intellectual drive, but you're also implying a potential lack of a social boundary. You can be inquisitive about something, you are genuinely seeking knowledge, but if you become too inquisitive about a friend's salary, you might be deemed nosy. Understanding that subtle social boundary is critical for deploying this word correctly.
We've established the lexicon for personality and learning. Now let's apply these concepts to the friction points of modern professional life. Stress, pressure, and the search for well-being. We begin with what the source material correctly identifies as the buzzword of our generation. Work-life balance. We all use it, but how do we define it with precision?
It is the amount of time you spend dedicated to your job compared to the time dedicated to enjoyable non-work activities, leisure, hobbies, time with family, or just resting. It's fundamentally a question of resource allocation.
The sources immediately pivot to the business insight here. Why should an employer care about their employees' balance? It's not just about being nice, is it?
No, it's rooted in economics and performance. Smart employers know that workers who maintain a good work-life balance are, paradoxically, more dependable, more loyal, and ultimately significantly more productive during the hours they are working. A balanced worker is a sustainable worker.
But the sources are quick to acknowledge the systemic difficulty here, which elevates the discussion past simple self-help platitudes. Many people stuck in demanding roles are there because they invested years in training or they have financial dependence. It's not simply a matter of choosing to switch careers.
That is the critical layer. It challenges the insensitive advice that often gets dispensed. You can't just advise a surgeon or a lawyer with immense debt and a family to just quit and find balance. We have to acknowledge that systemic constraints, long training pipelines, economic necessity, high living costs often make achieving that perfect balance a tremendous, almost impossible challenge for vast swaths of the workforce.
And when that balance is lost, the inevitable physical and mental consequence we must articulate precisely is fatigue. This is extreme tiredness, exhaustion.
It's so much more than just being tired. Fatigue implies a deep systemic depletion. And to use this word with impact, we rely on strong collocations. Students in the run-up to final exams might suffer from severe fatigue, or we might have to actively battle fatigue when pushing through a difficult project.
We can also categorize the type depletion. We can talk about physical fatigue from intense exercise or mental fatigue from overworking the brain with complex problems.
And for maximum impact, in a professional report or a medical context, we use the intense modifiers, extreme or severe fatigue. But for true advanced usage, integrating the phrase the onset of fatigue, meaning the beginning or start of the exhaustion, shows precise timing and understanding.
That makes the diagnosis so much more precise. I need to review my weekly hours because I felt the onset of fatigue by Wednesday afternoon. It pinpoints the exact failure point.
And the sources emphasize that the most critical avoidance strategy, confirmed by countless studies, is sufficient sleep. Consistently getting less than 7 or 8 hours is a recipe for disaster. Using the precise term fatigue in this context just lends weight to the argument for prioritizing rest.
Now, let's look at 2 verbs that are crucial for describing action in the face of challenges. First, face uses a verb.
We typically think of face as a noun, but as a verb, it means to deal with or confront a difficult situation. It immediately implies a challenge. Governments face the difficult task of winning public votes. Students face the final exam schedule.
The sources use this verb to tackle a major contemporary real-world challenge, the economic situation facing young graduates in Britain right now.
And the list of obstacles is lengthy and demanding. They face a significantly more competitive job market than previous generations did. This is compounded by a cost of living crisis, rising inflation, exponentially high rental costs, and expensive utilities like gas and electric. Using the verb face captures the sheer difficulty of these tough obstacles for young people to overcome. It conveys confrontation with serious systemic forces.
The tool for overcoming those difficulties, or at least the verb that describes making success possible, is enable. To make someone able to do something, or to make something possible.
It defines the mechanism of potential and access. Think of technology. The internet and search engines have enabled billions of people globally to access huge quantities of information in seconds. That was unimaginable a generation ago. The technology itself is the mechanism of possibility.
And in the context of learning, how can teachers enable students to reach their full potential?
By addressing the internal obstacles first. The sources stress that enabling success often requires helping students feel comfortable and confident. If a student is dealing with self-doubt or low self-esteem, those emotional barriers can make reaching their potential especially difficult. Enabling is often about removing the psychological roadblocks so that ability can manifest. It's an act of facilitation, not provision.
We've covered the lexicon of professional life and personal resilience. Now we shift our focus to the physical spaces we inhabit, how we describe our neighborhoods, the challenges of urban life, and the density of our world. We begin with a social structure concept that shapes communities, generation gap.
This is a widely used sociological term. It describes a lack of understanding or sometimes conflict between older and younger people because of their profoundly different life experiences, especially around technology, culture, and economic realities. The key verb associated with it is bridging the generation gap, the effort to make that difference smaller.
The sources offer an insightful cultural comparison here. While there is a generation gap in the UK, the speaker contrasts this with having lived in China, where they perceived the difference in thinking between generations to be much more substantial, possibly because of the speed of development there.
And they use a specific, highly relatable example to illustrate how the gap manifests in the UK. The monarchy. They observe that support for the monarchy is generally much higher among older generations than it is among younger generations.
So this shows that the gap isn't just about music tastes, it penetrates political and cultural allegiance.
Absolutely. That concept of social structure brings us to a crucial adjective for describing positive community life: close-knit.
I like that word.
Close-knit describes groups of people who are strongly connected and provide mutual support. We see it used frequently in high-impact collocations. A close-knit family, a close-knit community, or a close-knit neighborhood. It implies a density of social ties, not necessarily physical proximity.
And the sources raise a powerful implication. Globalization often makes it harder for close-knit families and communities to remain intact as people have to move for work or education.
That loss of connection is significant. The benefits of a close-knit structure are highlighted. You have neighbors to rely on in an emergency, people to spend time with, and a strong sense of local belonging. Losing that supportive framework is a significant social cost of high mobility.
That sense of belonging often relies on what the location offers, which moves us to amenities. These are structures or facilities intended to make life more pleasant or comfortable.
Right. Amenities include leisure facilities, shopping centers, public services. We use strong collocations like improve amenities, or we discuss a lack of amenities, and we can categorize them: basic, local, public, modern, or social amenities.
This vocabulary really explains urbanization. Why do people flock to cities despite the congestion and expense? Because of the density of amenities.
The speaker's personal example perfectly illustrates this magnet effect. Living in an area with schools, cafes, sports facilities, and a state-of-the-art gym, all accessible within a 10-minute walk. The quality and accessibility of amenities are a defining factor in modern quality of life.
That focus on living space defines our next term: residential.
Residential relates specifically to areas where people live as opposed to where they work or shop. We talk about a residential neighborhood or a residential area. And crucially, the sources note the trend that prime residential areas are often being pushed further away from traditional city centers because of cost and space limitations.
In the noun form, resident describes the people who live there. We touched on the immense cost of prime residential property like those huge Victorian houses in Edinburgh that are now worth multiple millions. The sheer financial value attached to a desirable residential area is just staggering.
And when people concentrate for amenities, the result is often densely populated areas. This describes a high volume of things or people packed closely together.
Mexico City is often cited as one of those densely populated cities in the world. We also use the adjective dense traffic patterns or densely packed apartment blocks.
And the experience of a dense city is contrasted powerfully in the sources. Think of busy South London, which can feel incredibly busy and loud during rush hour. Contrast that with a less densely populated city like Edinburgh, where people often move explicitly seeking a more tranquil pace of life. This vocabulary gives us the precision to describe that urban character.
If you were looking for that tranquility or simply lower costs, you often look toward the outskirts.
The outskirts are defined as the area forming the edge of a city. We use the phrase with a specific city, the outskirts of Edinburgh or the outskirts of Cairo. And the economic reality is clear. Residential property tends to be significantly cheaper on the outskirts compared to the city center.
The sources paint a very specific picture of the outskirts in Edinburgh, noting they are often industrial, filled with warehouses, large shopping centers, bypass roads, not particularly picturesque, but necessary for logistics and for providing space that the dense core can't offer.
And the discussion of housing price instantly leads to affordable. Simple definition, not expensive. But the policy implications are vast and politically charged.
That's where the discussion gets interesting. Should the government subsidize housing to make it more affordable? This is a massive societal debate.
The sources acknowledge the need. Subsidized housing is generally seen as a positive necessity because, without it, buying or renting in dense urban areas can be nearly impossible for low and middle-income workers. However, the critical layer of complexity is the policy execution.
I want to push back on the sources here, because political critiques often suggest that massive government subsidy can actually distort the market, artificially inflating prices for everyone who doesn't qualify, making the area even less affordable for a slightly higher income bracket. How does the source reconcile that conflict?
That is a fantastic point. The sources don't offer a perfect solution, but they insist that if subsidies are used, the process has to be characterized by absolute transparency and fairness. The political conundrum is determining eligibility, who gets the assistance, and how much. The language of affordable home and affordable housing provides the precise framework needed for that difficult policy discussion.
And the reality of living in a dense, built environment leads us directly to the pain point of city life.
Congestion and the commuter experience.
Congestion. It's defined as too much traffic, making movement difficult, slow, and frustrating. We talk about active steps to ease, reduce, or relieve congestion. And the policy response is often a congestion charge, a fee, to drive into the city center during peak hours.
What are the negative consequences of high city congestion? The sources, drawing on experience living in Shanghai, cite the obvious issues: air pollution and noise pollution, which severely degrade the quality of life. But they introduce a more subtle, often overlooked problem: social isolation. When people spend significantly more time stuck in traffic or on crowded public transport, they have less time and energy left to interact with their neighbors and local community. High traffic congestion subtly erodes the social fabric, making that close-knit community feel unattainable.
Which brings us to the person making that journey, the commuter.
The commute is the regular journey between work and home, and the commuter is the person who does it every day. The sheer volume of time dedicated to the commute has enormous implications for our work-life balance.
The speaker's reflection on working from home highlights the dual nature of the commute. The benefits of avoiding rush hour and being able to cook lunch at midday are huge advantages. But the downside is the loss of the hidden benefits, the extra exercise from cycling or walking to work. The commute isn't just a journey, it's a physical and social activity that imposes costs or sometimes hidden benefits that have to be intentionally replaced.
Precisely. Using commute and commuter correctly allows you to discuss these trade-offs with precision, analyzing policy decisions like hybrid work models and their true impact on health and social connectivity.
We've built up a sophisticated vocabulary for analyzing society, personality, and the environment. For our final section, we're looking at the psychological and social aspects of transition and change, and we'll wrap up with a critical environmental term. When people make a huge life transition, moving away from home, the first inevitable feeling is homesick or suffering from homesickness.
This is unhappiness, sometimes deeply felt, due to being away from familiar surroundings and loved ones. The sources offer very practical coping mechanisms. The first is maintaining connection through video calls and messages, but the second part is active integration, going out of your way to feel comfortable and included in the new community, making new friends, and learning about the country. You have to build a new scaffolding of belonging.
And if that transition is to a dramatically different environment, the emotional intensity rises to culture shock. This is a feeling of confusion, disorientation, or even anxiety when you're visiting a place or interacting with a community that is profoundly unfamiliar.
The key to minimizing severe culture shock is proactive preparation. The sources advise learning customs, social norms, and basic etiquette beforehand. It's not just about learning history, it's about knowing how to interact without causing offense or experiencing unintentional misunderstandings. That basic research drastically lowers the friction of entry.
Sometimes, whether you move abroad or just overload your schedule, the feeling becomes overwhelmed, just having too much to deal with.
This is such a powerful descriptor of capacity overload. We use it in two main forms. The verb, excessive assignments can overwhelm students with too much homework. And then the adjective, feeling overwhelmed when multitasking, like trying to write an important email while listening to a technical presentation.
The speaker's personal reflection on this is very relatable. Generally good at staying calm, but feeling intensely overwhelmed when multiple deadlines converge, particularly when they have a lot of essays to give students feedback on alongside administrative duties. It perfectly captures that specific feeling of having your resources stretched past their limit.
And we can use the related adjective overwhelming to describe the source of the stress. An exam can be overwhelming. A task can be overwhelming. This allows for a really precise discussion of both the cause and the effect of mental strain.
Finally, we turn our attention to conservation and responsibility, anchoring this deep dive with the word endangered.
This means in danger of being harmed, lost, or ceasing to exist, like the black rhino or various plant species. The verb form is in danger, meaning our actions like habitat destruction put other species at risk. This word is just central to all policy and environmental conservation discussions.
It naturally leads to policy discussions, like the necessity of enacting laws prohibiting the hunting of endangered animals, species, or plants. But the sources prompt us to consider a controversial element in conservation efforts: the role of zoos and aquariums.
And the discussion provided is very balanced. Zoos and aquariums, while often criticized, can serve a complex, multifaceted role. They are essential centers for research, public education, and raising awareness about species on the brink. And crucially, they facilitate breeding programs and the reintroduction of endangered species into the wild, which is a vital part of recovery.
But there's an ethical caveat that must be maintained for this role to be effective and sound.
Yes. The sources are clear. This positive role only holds true if the institutions absolutely prioritize animal welfare and the fair, respectful treatment of the animals in their care. Without that commitment, they undermine the very conservation message they are trying to promote. The word endangered forces us to confront this societal responsibility.
And we have completed the circuit. We just powered through 30 incredibly versatile words and phrases. We've analyzed everything from macro issues like congestion and materialism to micro skills like building rapport and defining personal diligence. These words are so much more than just vocabulary. They are analytical tools that allow you to critique society, structure future plans, and describe complex social dynamics with a precision that simple language just cannot match.
That is the ultimate takeaway for you, the learner. The goal isn't just rote memorization of a definition. The mastery comes from understanding the context and the collocation, how these words partner with others, so you can deploy them accurately and impactfully in high-stakes communication. This command of lexical resource immediately signals sophistication.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, the source material provided us with one final crucial learning strategy. It's not about the content we discussed, but the method for making sure this sophisticated knowledge moves from short-term awareness to long-term usable application. This is how you prevent knowledge fade.
It's the scientifically validated concept of spaced repetition. The source advises a highly effective schedule. Practice the vocabulary tonight, then practice it tomorrow, then wait 2 days, then 4 days, then 8 days, and practice again. This strategy ensures you aren't just cramming, which leads to rapid forgetting, but you're integrating the knowledge deep into your memory structure by revisiting and reactivating the concepts just as they begin to fade.
That systemized approach is what guarantees the knowledge becomes permanent. So here's our final provocative thought for you. Now that you have these 30 powerful tools for sophisticated communication, how can you apply spaced repetition tonight, tomorrow, and then across the coming days to ensure this vocabulary becomes a permanent, seamless part of your intellectual toolkit? Go put these words to use. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive. Okay, let's unpack this. We have a fascinating set of materials today, and it's focused entirely on the language we use to describe, well, where we live, our hometown.
Right, and it's so much more than just, a list of synonyms.
Oh, absolutely. This isn't about finding basic geographical terms. Our source material, it provides a complete linguistic blueprint for urban and rural analysis. It's about using these really specific, descriptive words.
Words that instantly convey so much.
Exactly. Context, atmosphere, social structure, even economic history. All in a single word sometimes.
And what's fascinating here, I think, is just how organized and hierarchical this linguistic map is. I mean, we're moving from the macro areas.
The big picture stuff.
Yeah, the sprawling city versus the quiet countryside. And then we drill all the way down to the micro details, things like the geometry of shared walls or the subjective experience of traffic.
I love that, the subjective experience. It's that kind of depth that lets you move beyond just saying, my city is big and busy.
Exactly. That's the goal.
So our deep dive mission today is to extract the most advanced descriptive vocabulary. We're talking about the kind of nuanced words native speakers use, almost without thinking.
Effortlessly.
Effortlessly. We want to give you a complete toolkit for analyzing and describing any area. We want to equip you to talk not just about the location of a place, but the life inside it.
Indeed. And, this raises a really important question. How much detailed information, we're talking economic, historical, sociological, can a single well-chosen word really convey?
A surprising amount, it turns out.
A huge amount. So we've broken the material down into 4 interconnected categories. We're going to start with the broad strokes, the geography of areas.
Yeah.
Then we'll look at the geometry of dwellings. After that, we'll explore the anatomy of urban features, the systems that make a place actually function.
The nuts and bolts.
The nuts and bolts.
Well,
and finally, we'll analyze the social fabric and the lifestyle that truly defines a community.
Let's jump right in. Starting at the scale we all recognize, the neighborhood. The source material rightly points out that the real linguistic power isn't the noun itself. It's the specific adjectives we use.
That's the critical distinction, isn't it? A neighborhood is just, a small area within a city or town where people live. But when you pair it with an adjective,
it changes everything.
It signals immediate social context. Think about the difference between a trendy neighborhood, which suggests, high rents and new development.
For sure. Versus a historic neighborhood, which makes me think of preservation rules and deep roots.
Exactly. Or even something more personal. The source uses a great example, something like, I live in a quiet neighborhood where everyone knows each other by name.
Right. And that single phrase, just because the word quiet and that extra detail, it communicates so much. High social trust, lower population turnover.
Maybe a slightly slower pace of life.
You've given a complete vibe check in one sentence. It's incredibly efficient.
We can also use population to define it, as the source suggests. Something like, there are a lot of young families in my neighborhood.
And that immediately gives you a demographic snapshot. It signals the presence of schools, playgrounds, and probably larger family homes.
It also suggests future demand for things like childcare, community centers. It's all packed in there.
But neighborhoods don't exist in a vacuum, right? They exist within these larger zones, and we need specific vocabulary to delineate the purpose of that land. So let's look at the main zoning types, starting with the residential area.
Okay, so this is defined as an area that's composed mainly of homes, and specifically it excludes significant commercial centers or factories.
So using the term residential area is a bit more formal. It's emphasizing that it's all about housing.
It is. It sets an expectation for quiet, for lower traffic volumes compared to other zones.
And the source points out that the most effective way to use this term is to acknowledge the trade-off that comes with it.
Yes, that example is brilliant. Living in a residential area is peaceful, but you depend on a car.
That's so perfect. It simultaneously signals the quiet comfort, but also the logistical challenges, that distance from shops or public transport.
It's a highly effective statement because it moves beyond a simple definition and explains that inherent tension in your choice of location.
So what's the functional opposite of that?
That would be the industrial area. This zone is defined by factories, manufacturing, warehouses, large businesses. It's the complete opposite of a peaceful residential zone.
And its presence usually defines the property values and noise levels for anything next to it, which brings us to a crucial verb from the source material, to border.
Yes, to border. It means to share an edge or a boundary with something else. It suggests a really clear line of demarcation, often with distinct consequences.
So it's more specific than just saying something is near it.
Much more specific. Consider the example. My neighborhood borders an industrial area, so it can be quite noisy during the day. using border signals that your experience of your home is actively directly affected by that industrial activity.
And that boundary isn't always fixed. I mean, we see this trend of conversion, right? An area used to be mainly industrial, but it's being converted into a residential area.
And that word, converted, linguistically and economically, it signals so much.
What does it signal?
Well, it signals economic transition. It signals massive cleanup efforts, often called remediation, and a huge injection of capital. This is something we'll discuss later under gentrification, but this is the start.
Right, because conversion often means tearing down old factories and building new housing, which is usually more expensive.
Exactly. The land is now closer to downtown than existing suburbs, or maybe it suddenly has a waterfront view that was blocked by factories for 100 years. Conversion is the linguistic flag for rapid, expensive change.
Okay, let's zoom out now. Let's map the larger urban-rural continuum. We need the language to describe that journey from the very core of a city to its far-flung edges.
Right. If we connect this to the bigger picture, we see basically three distinct city environments based on distance from the center. And the absolute core is the downtown or city center.
The engine of the city.
The engine. It's the main commercial, business, and often cultural hub. And in North America, the term downtown is generally what you'll hear much more than city center.
And downtown represents a very specific, high-intensity lifestyle. We talk about it in terms of commuting all the time.
All the time. Like, I live in the suburbs, but I commute to downtown for work.
Or you hear people say, hypothetically, if I didn't have kids, I'd definitely live downtown.
Yes. And the assumption there is access to nightlife, to culture, very short commutes, maybe even walkable.
But you're trading off space and quiet. And definitely affordability.
That density is key. Now, moving away from that dense core, we hit the suburbs, or as native speakers casually and universally call them,
the burbs.
The burbs. And this is essentially a residential neighborhood that's located on the outer edge of the main city, usually a pretty significant distance from downtown.
So the key identifiers are that residential zoning combined with the distance.
That's it. People often move to the suburbs for that exact compromise. You get more space, sometimes better schools, and it's more affordable compared to downtown.
You hear phrases like, my family recently moved to the suburbs because we needed a detached home and it was more affordable there.
Or, we just bought a house in a newly developed suburb. And that little descriptor, newly developed, immediately signals sprawl and a construction boom.
And a massive lifestyle shift. Living in the burbs means you're relying on a car for almost everything.
Everything. And your proximity to downtown, it really determines your quality of life as a commuter. If you're a super commuter, traveling over an hour each way, well, that affordability comes with a very high time cost.
Okay, so moving even further out, we find the outskirts. This feels a bit different from the suburbs.
It is. It refers to the outermost part of a town or city, even beyond the main residential suburbs. This is often where the city's logistical needs are met.
And grammatically, this one is tricky. The source material is very specific about this.
It is, and it's a vital point for advanced speakers. You must use the preposition on and the article the, and the word itself is always plural. It's always on the outskirts.
Right. So you wouldn't say in the outskirt. That just sounds wrong.
It does. You'd say, they're building a new mega hospital on the outskirts, or the city's main airport and logistical centers are located on the outskirts.
So these areas typically house things that need a lot of land or maybe loud, big infrastructure.
Exactly. Things that are unsuitable for core residential development.
And finally, we leave the defined city structure entirely. We arrive at the rural area or just.
The country. This is the countryside, far away from cities or towns, and it's defined by low population density and often by agriculture.
The source confirms that native speakers use the country and rural area pretty much interchangeably.
They do. You could say, I was raised in a rural area surrounded by wheat farms, or I live in the country on a 50-acre property and I rarely drive into the city.
Both of those instantly convey that sense of distance, of space, a deliberate absence of urban density.
What's interesting is how the word choice can reflect the speaker's perspective. If you live there, you tend to call it the country. If you're describing it from the city, you often use the more sort of clinical term, rural area.
Now, connecting back to the very largest scale, we need the ultimate descriptor for the whole big, interconnected, busy system.
That would be metropolitan.
Such a powerful word.
It's a powerful, formal adjective. It describes a vast, busy city area, lots of people, buildings, and often several interconnected suburbs and smaller surrounding towns. It's the direct conceptual opposite of a small, rural town.
It captures that sense of scale and complexity so well. If someone says, I moved from a small town in the country to a major metropolitan city, you know they're talking about a complete lifestyle shift.
Cultural, social, economic, everything. It implies a much faster pace, higher competition, a much wider availability of specialized services.
And that scale provides this immense economic gravitational pull.
For sure. The source points out that living in a metropolitan area gives you more job options. That high density of people and businesses creates an economic engine that smaller rural towns just can't replicate.
Which contributes to that phenomenon people call brain drain from rural areas.
Absolutely. Metropolitan status signifies economic dominance.
So that scale metropolitan, it forces certain changes on the ground, doesn't it? I mean, you can't sustainably build detached homes everywhere in a massive metro area.
Not at all. The geography dictates the geometry of our dwellings.
Okay, so let's move into that now. How high-density areas change the fundamental definition of home. And we're starting with the degree of separation, focusing on shared walls.
Right. And this is where descriptive language becomes incredibly efficient. It immediately tells you about privacy, about lot size, and usually about the price point. The most spacious and often most expensive type is the detached home.
So this is a standalone house. It doesn't share any walls with another home.
Correct. And using the term detached adds crucial descriptiveness. It's more precise than just saying a house.
Yeah, if you say, I grew up in a detached house with a big backyard, that word detached instantly suggests privacy, space all around it, a private driveway.
And complete autonomy over the structure itself. You can paint it whatever color you want.
Contrast that immediately with the semi-detached house. The prefix semi tells you half right.
Exactly. It means it shares one single wall with another house. They're essentially built as mirror images connected by that common wall.
And the functional implication there is noise.
Almost always, yes. You get the benefit of a lower price tag in a small yard, but you lose the soundproofing and the absolute privacy of a detached home.
The source notes a native speaker alternative for this, which I thought was interesting.
Oh, yeah. Side by side. If you hear someone say, I live in a side by side, they're talking about a semi-detached house. It's a great piece of local vernacular to have in your back pocket.
And moving on to even higher density, we have the row house or townhouse.
Right. This is a group of homes built in a continuous row. Each home typically shares walls on both sides with its neighbors, unless you're on the end unit.
And the source clarifies a subtle technical difference here. Because people use row house and townhouse almost interchangeably.
They do, and it's usually fine. But technically, a townhouse is a specific style of row house. It's the kind that's tall and narrow, usually spanning 2 or 3 floors.
And this design is really prevalent in modern, dense urban planning.
It is, because it maximizes vertical space on a very small footprint of land.
So you might say something like, I used to live in a 3-story townhouse close to downtown that had its own garage.
And that provides a very clear picture. A tall, narrow structure, often found in that up-and-coming kind of neighborhood we'll talk about later.
Okay, this brings us to a really fundamental distinction in city living that isn't about the physical walls, but about the financial structure, the ownership model.
This is a critical point. It defines lifestyle and investment, especially in dense metropolitan areas. An apartment is a unit inside a larger residential building that you rent.
Right. You're a tenant. The transaction is a lease. The landlord owns the asset and is responsible for maintenance.
Exactly. So you are paying for convenience and location, but you're not building equity.
You might say, I've been living in an apartment downtown for the last 5 years because I need flexibility. Flexibility and zero maintenance responsibility are often the big draws.
The contrast, then, is the condominium, or as almost everyone calls it,
The condo.
the condo. Structurally, a condo unit can be identical to an apartment, but the critical difference is that you own the unit rather than renting it.
But the ownership model is more complex than owning a detached home, isn't it?
Oh, much more complex. This is where we need to get into the technical details. When you buy a condo, you are legally buying the airspace within your unit's walls.
The airspace, not the structure itself.
Right. And you collectively own all the common elements of the building. The lobby, the roof, the elevators, the gym.
Which means you have to manage it collectively.
Precisely. That collective ownership requires collective management, which is handled by a homeowners association or an HOA. Sometimes it's called a strata.
And that structure imposes those required monthly fees, the HOA fees.
Yes. And those fees cover the maintenance of all those shared amenities, like the gym or the rooftop terrace.
That is such a critical piece of information. When you're calculating the cost of living for a condo, you have to factor in the mortgage, the property taxes, and those monthly HOA fees.
Absolutely. So you might say, I recently bought a condo downtown. The monthly mortgage is manageable, but the HOA fees are quite high because of the pool and 247 concierge service.
Using that detail immediately signals that you understand the financial reality of that property type. The high HOA fee often reflects a high-end, amenity-rich lifestyle.
Lifestyle that's inaccessible to renters in a standard apartment building.
Okay, moving from the floor plan to the skyline. Let's talk about height, which is particularly relevant in those dense metropolitan areas where land is so expensive.
We need language for vertical density. A high-rise is a very tall building with many floors. It's typically used for apartments, condos, or offices. In most places, anything over, say, 7 or 8 stories would qualify.
And high-rise works perfectly as a highly descriptive adjective. You could talk about a high-rise office or buying a high-rise condo with incredible city views.
Exactly. It defines the vertical character of the area. And the next level up from that is the skyscraper.
So what's the difference? Just more floors?
It's more than that. A skyscraper is an extremely tall building, designated as significantly taller and more architecturally complex than a standard high-rise. Skyscraper status implies landmark architecture.
That's specialized engineering, I'd imagine.
Oh, absolutely. Specialized engineering and safety protocols because of the extreme height. There's a psychological distinction, too. High-rises are functional. Skyscrapers are often symbolic.
Right. They're competing to be the tallest in the city, representing civic pride, economic ambition.
Exactly. Now, when we describe a location, especially its functionality and, its long-term viability, the quality of its fundamental systems is critical. We use 2 complementary terms for this: infrastructure and amenities.
Infrastructure. That's a massive and foundational concept.
Yeah.
So it's the basic physical systems that support an area. Roads, electricity grids, water lines, internet cables.
It's the foundation upon which everything else is built. And crucially, the source uses this as a singular concept. The infrastructure in my hometown has improved a lot recently. It's treated as one big network.
And if that infrastructure is poor, say the water pipes are old or the internet is slow, it limits all future development.
It's a cap on growth, no matter how great the location is. Now, complementary to infrastructure are amenities.
Okay, so these are the quality of life additions, the useful services and facilities that make life easier and more enjoyable.
That's a perfect way to put it. This includes everything from shops, quality schools and hospitals, to gyms and reliable public libraries.
Amenities are often the driving force behind where people choose to live, especially families. You might say, we moved to a neighborhood because it had fantastic amenities, including a newly built community center.
And as the source pointed out earlier, the lack of amenities is powerfully illustrated by specific details. That rural example is excellent.
Oh, right. I live in a rural area that lacks basic amenities. I have to drive 15 minutes just to get milk.
That specific detail immediately conveys the logistical reality, the inefficiency, the time drain. It says so much more than there are no stores nearby.
A key part of the amenity structure in any functioning metropolitan city is the public transportation system.
For sure. This covers all the buses, trains, subways, and other transport options available to the public. And we can immediately assess its quality with clear adjectives.
So if it's poorly maintained and unreliable, you'd say it's outdated.
Exactly. Unfortunately, my city has a very outdated public transportation system. That means the vehicles are old, the maintenance is sporadic. Conversely, a modern and reliable public transportation system is essential for reducing traffic.
Okay, here's where it gets, for me, really interesting. Connecting the past, the present, and the environment. Let's move into the historical and natural character of a place, starting with the historic district.
This is an older, often central part of town that contains buildings with verifiable historical value, and they're typically protected by a government body.
So buying property here comes with significant constraints. It's not straightforward.
Not at all. The linguistic implication of living in a historic district is complex bureaucracy. The source details the trade-off perfectly. I bought a condo in a historic district, so renovations have been very slow because there are a lot of rules.
You can't just change the windows or paint the exterior.
No, you need approval from historical review boards to ensure consistency with the era. This adds time, expense, and often limits things like modern energy efficiency upgrades.
So it's a trade-off. You get to live in history, but you sacrifice modern flexibility. Now, moving from history to nature, we have green space.
Right. This is land that's reserved for parks, gardens, or natural areas within an otherwise dense urban environment. And again, notice it's used as a singular concept.
The city council is trying to create more green space downtown.
By converting old parking lots into public gardens.
Exactly. Green space is increasingly valued in metropolitan areas as a counterbalance to all that concrete and density.
And on the topic of desirable natural features, we have waterfront.
Such a desirable word. A waterfront is a highly sought-after area along a body of water. An ocean, a river, a large lake.
And the word itself just conveys status and high value. It's a great adjective. A waterfront condo, a waterfront park.
The location instantly elevates the perception and definitely the price of that property or facility.
And the presence of a waterfront or a big central park, it often influences the energy, the vibe of the whole area. This leads us to language describing activity and energy. Let's start with the word bustling. Bustling. It means very busy and full of positive activity. It suggests vitality, commerce, social interaction. And remember the phonetic detail. The T is often silent. It sounds like bustling.
Right. The market district is always bustling because of its proximity to the waterfront. It's busy in a good way. It implies excitement, convenience.
Now let's talk about attractions. We all know what a tourist attraction is, a specific place visitors go, like an old fort. But the key piece of advanced vocabulary here is the evaluative adjective derived from it, touristy.
Okay, so what does touristy really signal to a native speaker? Is it just crowded?
It's more than crowded. It signals a lack of quality, and crucially, it carries a strong negative connotation.
Quite.
It's used to describe places designed mainly for tourists, implying inflated prices, poor quality food, tourist trap restaurants, and a complete lack of local authenticity.
It's a very efficient way to dismiss an entire area.
It is. If you want to communicate, I'm looking for an authentic experience, not an overpriced souvenir shot. You just say, I try to avoid touristy areas. It suggests sophistication and local knowledge.
And finally, related to attractions and history, we have monuments.
Right. These are statues, structures, markers built explicitly to honor a person or a significant historical event. A memorial for soldiers or a pillar celebrating a city's anniversary. They provide historical anchoring and are often focal points for civic gatherings.
We've covered the structures, the systems, the geography. Now we shift to the people, the social fabric that gives a location its character. Let's start with the people who define the place. Locals.
This may seem simple, but the linguistic precision is important here. Locals are the people who reside in a place permanently, and when you describe them, you usually use the definite article. The locals.
Implying they are specific to that place, they have historical ties, they're distinct from visitors or newcomers.
Exactly. The locals in my town are very friendly to visitors. The term carries an implied sense of familiarity, of knowledge that outsiders lack.
And if those locals are particularly connected, we use the adjective tight-knit.
Right. This describes a community where people have a strong, close, mutually supportive relationship.
It conveys deep social integration. I grew up in a tight-knit community where everybody knew each other's problems and celebrated each other's successes.
That's a perfect example. It implies high levels of social trust, mutual support, a history of people relying on one another. But we have to introduce a nuance here.
Okay.
While tight-knit is usually positive, it can also carry a negative implication of being insular or exclusionary for newcomers. If a community is too tight-knit, it can be really hard for a new resident to break into that existing social circle.
So it suggests both strength and a potential rigidity. That's a great point.
Now, conversely, if the social relationships are broad and diverse, we use multicultural.
Having many different cultural, national, or ethnic groups all living and interacting in the same area.
And this is almost always cited as a profound positive influence. The source suggests saying, growing up in a multicultural environment taught me to be open-minded and appreciate different perspectives.
Yeah, multicultural areas are often these vibrant hubs of different types of food, language, artistic expression.
And a word that captures the positive reception of that diversity is welcoming. It simply means friendly and open to new people, a key trait for a neighborhood trying to attract investment.
Despite being a large city, the people in my hometown are very welcoming to newcomers.
Moving from general social dynamics to economic identity, neighborhoods often strongly correlate with class structure. We have two key terms here based on employment status.
First, the working class neighborhood.
Right, an area where most people have lower paid, often manual or service sector jobs. And the area is typically characterized by smaller houses, maybe row houses, often built close together.
It denotes a specific economic reality and probably a greater reliance on public services.
For sure. Compared to the middle-class neighborhood, here most people have stable, well-paid, white-collar or professional jobs, and they live in comfortable homes, often semi-detached or detached, with private yards.
And the move from a working class to a middle class area often represents a massive leap in stability and economic security for a family.
It really does. Now let's consider demographic and transit realities. The composition of the population heavily dictates the character of the place, leading to the term aging population.
This describes an area that primarily consists of elderly people.
And that demographic gap is often caused by young people moving to the city for work or education and then just not returning.
And that shift has deep implications when talking about a hometown.
Yep.
You might say, my town has an aging population, and that's why 3 of the 4 elementary schools have closed.
That immediately ties demographics to the decline of local amenities and infrastructure. It's a powerful connection.
And the counterpoint to the resident or the aging local is the commuter.
Yes. These are people who travel daily or regularly between their distant home and their work or school. They're often using that public transportation system or highly congested roads we talked about.
So it's a noun describing the person. And the source notes that living on the outskirts can make being a commuter really difficult.
Absolutely. It links right back to our geographic definitions. If you're a commuter, you are fundamentally trading time for affordability and space.
Now we get into the subjective experience, the pace of life itself, ranging from positive energy to negative stress. Let's start with the busy terms.
Okay, first up is hectic. It means very busy and full of activity, but it carries a strong negative connotation. It implies stress, overwhelming noise, chaos.
Living downtown can be quite hectic, especially during the morning rush hour when the construction starts. I can feel that.
Right. The word is used when the level of activity exceeds a comfortable limit. It contributes to fatigue and agitation.
And the positive counterpart to that
would be vibrant. This means full of energy, life, and positive activity. It carries a definite positive connotation. A neighborhood might have a vibrant art scene or a vibrant nightlife.
So it implies stimulating, exciting energy rather than chaotic stress.
Precisely. Now, for areas that are lacking activity, we use sleepy. This is a great advanced alternative to just saying boring.
It describes a quiet area with little activity, often implying that everything shuts down early.
It does. And while it generally sounds negative, like the town became sleepy after the main factory closed, it can be used positively in contrast.
As an escape.
Yes. I moved out of the city because I preferred the sleepy, quiet life of the country.
For traffic and crowding, we have congested.
A more precise and advanced replacement for busy or crowded, it highlights a bottleneck, a blockage.
We use it most often for roads. The main roads are extremely congested during rush hour, turning a 20-minute drive into an hour-long ordeal.
You can feel the frustration in that word. But it also applies to any area where capacity is exceeded. The small Central Park gets completely congested on sunny weekends.
And finally, the foundational descriptor that determines everything else. Safe.
It's the underpinning of community stability. Not dangerous, low crime, few risks. Safety is often the #1 priority that drives families to choose one residential area over another.
Okay, moving now to urban flux, how places change, deteriorate, and develop. The first term for deterioration is rundown.
This describes buildings or entire areas that look old, damaged, or severely neglected. It carries a clear negative judgment about investment and civic pride.
And when an area is becoming rundown, the source introduces a great verb phrase for grassroots efforts to counteract that.
To spruce up, I love this phrase. It means to make something cleaner, nicer, or more attractive, often through community effort or small-scale renovations.
It signals civic pride and a rejection of that rundown status. Our local park was looking rundown, so the locals organized a fundraiser to spruce things up with new paint and plantings.
It's a very hopeful phrase. Now, the linguistic opposite of rundown, indicating positive momentum, is up and coming.
a highly valued real estate term.
Oh, absolutely. It describes a place that is developing quickly, attracting new businesses, and becoming more attractive. Crucially, it signifies that the change is currently in progress.
So it bridges that gap between sleepy and vibrant.
Exactly. If your neighborhood was quiet but is now opening 3 new high-end cafes, you can accurately describe it as up and coming. For investors, it signals profit. For longtime residents, it flags future risk.
And this brings us to the final and perhaps most critical vocabulary. The economic barometer itself. We have to discuss the cost of living.
This is the amount of money needed for basic expenses, housing, food, transportation, utilities. And note the required phrasing. It's always the cost of living.
It's the financial reality check of a place. It's consistently high in a major metropolitan city, lower in the suburbs or rural areas.
And we use active verbs to describe its movement. The increasing or rising cost of living is often the biggest stressor for residents.
And that rising cost of living is inextricably linked to the most significant process of urban flux. Gentrification.
This is when a poor, often working class or rundown area experiences an influx of new investment and wealthier residents. This causes the original housing stock to be replaced or renovated, and rental costs to just skyrocket.
Which inevitably leads to the displacement of original residents. They can no longer afford to live there.
It's a complex, rapid process that ties together every single term we've covered today.
How so?
Well, the source provides that vivid personal scenario. I lived in this neighborhood through gentrification. That means the resident watched as the original small working class houses
Were torn down.
and replaced by high-rise, amenity-rich condos, forcing those original tight-knit locals who were probably relying on outdated public transportation to move out to the outskirts.
Wow, it really does connect everything.
Gentrification is the perfect summation of this entire deep dive. It connects the macrogeography, the microarchitecture, and the financial stress of the community into a single, complex socioeconomic phenomenon. That linguistic shift from an area being called rundown to up and coming is often the first flag for impending gentrification.
It perfectly captures the economic reality of desirability, that improvements almost always come at a cost to the existing population.
We covered a vast linguistic territory today. I mean, we move seamlessly from the large-scale map, metropolitan, rural, suburban, down to the specific architecture.
It's attached, condo, high-rise.
And finally, to that nuanced human experience, hectic versus vibrant, tight-knit versus multicultural. The true value of this deep dive, I think, is understanding that one advanced word, like touristy or congested.
It's a linguistic shortcut.
It's a complete linguistic shortcut. It can replace an entire descriptive sentence and convey these really complex urban dynamics.
So you now have the linguistic tools to describe the complex relationship between housing, community, and commerce with precision and depth. And the most critical overarching concept we covered, the one that ties it all together, housing type, demographics, affordability, is gentrification.
It really is. It's the engine of rapid, often unsettling change in our environments. It simultaneously brings in new amenities while pushing out established communities.
It summarizes that tension between progress and preservation in the modern city.
Perfectly put.
So what does this all mean for you? You can now analyze the character of your own area, or any area you visit, with a much more elevated lexicon. So here's a provocative thought to leave you with, tying back to that core conflict we just discussed. If gentrification forces out original residents by exponentially increasing the cost of living, and an up-and-coming area is defined by the arrival of new, expensive stores and restaurants that make the area vibrant, does every place that becomes positively vibrant necessarily have to leave some people behind? That's something for you to mull over as you analyze the development and the true character of your own neighborhood.